Hello everybody. Earlier today I posted a video with two studies, one which was more simple for lower rated players and one more complicated which requires more calculation, and I asked you to try to solve it blindfolded. Here are the solutions for those two positions. The first one is very typical, and if you're not familiar with this position by now or with a similar idea, you should certainly go back and review some of the king-pawn endgame positions. Now, what is important to notice about this position immediately is that, of course, white has a pawn down, but quite simple, right? Something else that you should try to realize is that on some normal play, black should be able to play king e2, capture that pawn in f3, right? And then they'll have two pawns up. Unless you play a move like king g3 and try to go grab one of the pawns, and in that case, black will respond king e1, and after king g4, king f2. And now, if you capture this pawn in g5, black is going to capture in f3, after which this pawn is just going for a queen without further ado. And if you're trying to play king f5 to be trickier and keep both pawns attacked, I still play the same move, king takes f3, and whichever one you capture, I'm going to push the other one, right? And you won't be able to capture it, because you won't be able to enter in the box of the pawn, or even if you are able, this king is restricting the other one. A very, very important idea in king-pawn endgames is, of course, king's activity, but also restriction. So, what do I mean by restricting the kings? I mean that well, the kings never approach each other more than one square in between them, right? So that's what restriction is. Stopping the opponent from getting too close to a specific target. So here after king g3, if after king e1, if white says, you know what, I'm not going to go for the pawns because I notice after king g2, king g4, king f2, there's no way white's king can stay to continue protecting the pawn. So I'm going to try to be a little bit smarter and play king g2 and keep my pawn protected. And then how are you going to win this? Well, now comes the nice part, opposition. When the kings are facing each other on a file, column or diagonal, and there's one square in between them, the last person who made that move, we say that that side basically just took the opposition. This is great because it brings up another important idea in king-pawn endgames, which is Zugzwang. Zugzwang is a German term which refers to the idea that you cannot make any move that's good. Oh, you have moves in the game, but none of them is good. All of the moves that you have are going to lead to you losing the game. So after king e2, now obviously white cannot push this pawn because it's just going to be captured, and black is winning without any troubles, of course. So here, in order for white to maintain some idea, they go king g3, right, to keep the pawn protected. But now after king g3, black goes king f1, trying to approach the pawn from behind it. And once again, if you go king g4, king f2, we've been in this position before, and if you try to stay a little bit away from the pawn but still able to protect it, black plays king f2, attacks the pawn, you have to protect it, and now king g2. Once again, I'm taking the opposition, I'm giving you the move. You need to move the king somewhere or play f4, which is going to lose the game immediately. But we've got this position or something very similar before. In case of capture, king takes f3, and the king is too it's not on the right square to stop this pawn from promoting. So this idea should be something that you become familiar with early on in your knowledge of chess. Okay, so king g3 is certainly not the right choice here to try to go for those pawns. What if white tries to restrict black's king, right? We discussed about restriction. And for example, play king f1 to restrict this king from approaching the pawn. Well, in that case, black goes king d2, and after king f2, right, continuing to restrict this king not to be able to approach on any of these squares. In this position, black goes king d3, and unfortunately for white, they cannot reciprocate. They cannot play king f3 anymore. So now, once again, we can say that white is in Zugzwang, because wherever they're going to move the king, black has reached the same rank as that pawn and is going to be able to play king e3 next move and eventually capture that pawn. Now if white goes king g2 here and after king e3 to take the opposition, this would be really awesome, because now this king is going to have some trouble capturing the pawn. But of course, after king g2, black has to remember the importance of the opposition and now go king e2, taking the opposition, forcing you out of the opposition, and now he's going from behind, restricting you so that you have to go forward, and then black is going to come via either g2 or f2 and then capture your pawn. So a simple move like king f1, which takes the opposition, is not the correct solution here either. So what to do? Well, the correct move in this position is king h1. And here you're going to learn about long distance opposition. When there's three squares in between the kings, whether it's on column or file or rank, that can be called long distance opposition. King h1 is the right move, and the reason that is the right move is that after king d2 trying to approach the pawn, white continues king h2 and keeps the opposition long distance. Anytime you're approaching on one of the squares, I'm going to reciprocate on the g file. So if you go king e3, I'll play king g3. If you play king e2, I'll play king g2. And if you play king e1, I'll play king g1. And you won't be able to create any ways of improvement further. After one of those moves, you can just continue playing king e2, but then I'll continue, as my arrows point out, whenever black is on e2, white will be on g2. So here comes a new important knowledge in the king-pawn endgames, and that is correspondent squares. So aside from the opposition, we're discussing correspondent squares, which means that whenever black is on a certain square, white has to only be on a certain other square. So like e2 is correspondent to g2. e3, whenever black goes on e3, white should be able to go on g3. If black goes in e1, let's make it green, white will, in order to make a draw, should go to g1. So that is something very, very important to remember. Same goes for the D file, D1, D2, D3, H1, H2, H3. Those are the correspondence squares for those. And if in this position black suddenly says, well, I do realize that I won't be able to do very much if I approach this pawn, what if I go further and try to get you on a square where you cannot correspond with me? Well, let's see what's happening. If black goes here king c2, we have to go on a square that's correspondent to that, right? King g2. 3 squares in between. Long distance opposition. If black suddenly plays king d3, where should we go? King h3. Okay? King d2, king h2, king e3, king g3, king e2, king g2, and you get the idea. Okay. A last move that I'm going to consider after king h1 is, of course, king e2 to attack the pawn directly. And now the corresponding square of this e2 square was g2, so white is able to go there. And whenever black goes king e3, king g3. And these 6 squares have these 6 squares as correspondent, right? Each one is has a specific other correspondence. And so if black tries to push one of these pawns, well, they have to be very careful, because g4, king takes g4, and after king f2, now white makes a draw. If black tries to play e4, well, once again we capture, and we know that this position is a draw after king g4. So trying to give away the pawns won't work. What if we go king d4 in this position? Well, in that case, you are furthering away from the back rank, so you won't be able to circle around and try to win the game. So white will play king g4. And now white is trying, of course, to capture that pawn. So you have to go back. But white is not going to capture. We already have seen that idea. White will play king g3. And after king e2, king g2, king d2, not f2. Be careful, you have to go on h2. And that's it, guys. This was the study of Neustadt. Let's save the study and go on to the next one, which was a little bit more complicated. Why was it more complicated? Well, because black has 3 pawns, right? So also what's happening here is that black is in the box of this pawn, whereas white is not technically in the box of this other pawn. And even if he would be, he's currently is, but you know that this pawn can just go h5 and suddenly the box restricts from being so big to being so big, right? And the king can't just reciprocate like that unless you go back and try to catch that pawn. But in that case, by the time you reach to capture that pawn, black will have captured a5 and be ready to capture e4, and the position will be lost for you. So the only way for white to save this position is by playing king b6. This is the correct move and answer for the Troitsky study. King b6. Now, what does white want to do? King b7 and then promote, right? Trying to restrict your king from entering in front of the pawn. If black plays h5 here, what does white do? White is just going to play a6, and white is going to win, right? So of course that is not in black's intention. That is not black's intention. So of course they have to try to make sure they're stopping that pawn from promoting. So black will play king c8 here, not to allow that pawn to promote. a6 still, threatening a7, king b8. Okay, now that black is about to stop that pawn, we need to come up with a new idea, because this pawn is just going to go for a queen and we'll lose this. So you have to keep going on the line. a7 check, king a8. And now let's not forget you've got another passed pawn. Well, it's not really passed currently, but you need to make it passed. So king c7, black is going for the queen. King takes d6, h4, king takes d7, h3, e5, h2, e6, h1 queen, e7. And this position should be winning for black, right? I mean, the pawn is on the e file. We all know what that means when the pawn is not on A, C, F, or H. That should be winning, right? So black is supposed to bring the queen close by, queen d5 check. And now you have to be careful and find the right way to save this game. And you will try to do so by stalemate. So you'll try to create a stalemate pattern, and whenever black will capture your opponent, it will be stalemate. So that's quite simple. King c7, we know what's the normal way of forcing white to get in front of the pawn by playing queen e6, attacking the pawn, king d8, only move to protect the pawn, and now black goes queen d6, and normally in any position where this king would be very far away and that pawn would not exist, white would be forced to go king e8, because otherwise if you would go to c8 you'd capture the pawn and win the game. But in this case, king c8 is the right move, because now if black captures in e7, it's a stalemate. So after king c8, white wants to promote. You have to do something about it. So black can go queen c6 check, king d8, and try to bring their king to b7, and now hoping for an e8 queen promotion so that he can checkmate you very nicely in c7. But of course here there's one last move that you have to find, and that move is a8 queen check first, and after king takes e8 queen, and now there's no mate, so white is able to draw the game. I hope you enjoyed these two positions and you had a lot to learn, and I'm going to be seeing you in the next video very soon. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.